in the wee hours of the morning, and you're here. So the reason why I've called you here is because, as you know, I have retired from public life. But you may not know, I have not retired from Trinidad and Tobago. And as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, I think it's my duty where I can help to improve the conversation, to protect the record. And as the Prime Minister of recent vintage, and who had responsibility for a lot of what is now attracting public attention, matters of great significance, and a person who has had a personal and direct involvement in a lot of what is now the subject of revision, I have a duty to ensure that somewhere on the record, the facts, the truth, and the gravity of the situation is made known to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I was following the news yesterday, and, well, on my phone, someone sent me notification of a press conference that was being had by the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, a person very well known to me and who I have made public comments about. Unfortunately, not favorable comments. But he is the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, involved in the business of Trinidad and Tobago. And what he says to the people of Trinidad and Tobago is the position of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And I was interested in what the Attorney General had to say on the matter of the Ofac license being received 24 hours before. And my interest was heightened by the fact that in recent times I've seen the government, in attempting to either take credit or to protect themselves from prior embarrassing positions, have been feeding the public misinformation. I don't want to use any stronger language at this point in time. I speak specifically to the very early hours of the UNC, where while there was a change of government in the United States, that change of government in our friendly country, our largest trading partner, would have met in place arrangements between the United States, Venezuela, CARICOM, Trinidad and Tobago. We have no involvement in who governs the United States. They have election every 2 years in the United States. And we treat with the government of Trinidad and Tobago. You might treat with different people as the offices change. You might build relationships, right? You might know who is with you, who is against you, where the issue has support, where it doesn't have support, but that is your job. And the same thing applies in Caracas, and the same thing applies in CARICOM. Very early in the life of this government, the Prime Minister, seeing a new Secretary of State in the United States, having a meeting with the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, then Stuart Young, who went to Jamaica to meet the Secretary of State and reported back what the Secretary of State said to Trinidad and Tobago by way of the Prime Minister. The government changed soon after that. And the new Prime Minister didn't wait for Secretary Rubio to take a position on the fluid matter that existed between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, or Chevron and Venezuela. You would have noticed that Chevron had an Ofac license to produce. That was a month-to-month license, which was given by a previous administration. That Ofac license was ended and a few months later restarted. Trinidad and Tobago, our Ofac license was ended, and we were in diplomatic discussions with the United States, as we have been for years. But before the Secretary of State could have been left to treat with that issue, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago announced that the Dragon deal was dead. I found that to be quite an alarming statement. It meant that now the United States had nothing to do because the government of Trinidad and Tobago had in itself determined that this issue no longer lives. The Dragon is dead. But for those of us who put years of work into creating what is commonly called the Dragon deal, that was an alarming development coming from Trinidad and Tobago. Granted that the Secretary of State cancelled the administration prior Ofac license, but they did the same thing with Chevron, an American company in Venezuela, which was in the process of producing. We have not yet started to produce. So that passed. The next thing happened is that the Prime Minister goes to the United Nations General Assembly. And as part of that trip en passant, the Prime Minister met with the Secretary of State. You in the media would have asked the Prime Minister, did you discuss the Dragon deal? And immediately the Prime Minister told him, no, that didn't come up. It didn't come up. Now, that worried me because something as important as that, being where it is, how could it not have come up? But then the Prime Minister went on to say that Secretary Rubio indicated that he would support Trinidad and Tobago's effort to get an Ofac license. That's what he said. The Prime Minister came back here and put into the media, and along with her minions, that we've got an Ofac license. And it took the PNM parliamentarians to point out, Rubio can't give you an Ofac license. Rubio is Secretary of State in Foreign Affairs. The Ofac license is a matter for the Treasury Department. The Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, is in the Treasury Department. And those of us who dealt with that issue and with those offices know that you literally have to deal with all the authorities at Treasury who are not beholden to another department. But if you have support from Foreign Affairs, Secretary of State, it's very good, great, because you expect that influence to carry across to Treasury. But in terms of having an Ofac license, until the Treasury gives you that, you don't have one. So why would the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago come back here and pretend to have an Ofac license when all you had was promise of support by the Secretary of State? And of course, eventually, there's a press conference and the Attorney General is now telling us that the Dragon has been resurrected by an Ofac license that has been issued a few hours ago. Well, we are all very happy to know that what has been cancelled has now been reinstated. But the first question that arises, what are the terms of the new license? Is it the same and it was just reinstated? Is it a new license that reflects the thinking of this new administration that improves our position or worsen our position? What are the terms of the new license? How is it different? Every time that question was put to the Attorney General, he bobbed and weaved, he was coy, eventually, the questions caused him to tell you it is really a 6-month provisional license in a step-by-step arrangement. And of course, he goes on to say and imply that this is a better arrangement for which they all should be congratulated, because the last government had sought a license to cover the whole situation, and now they have done better. They have a license that goes step by step, and there are benchmarks along the way that we have to meet. And if we meet those benchmarks, we will get permission to move forward to the next room, to the next level, until we get to a position where a well can send gas to Trinidad. What are these benchmarks? He told you he is not prepared to tell you anything about that. Well, I trust that you in the media and my colleagues in the parliament will find out what these benchmarks are. Because first and foremost, when we got that Ofac license, it was based on a series of face-to-face contact with decision makers. Because I would have told you all before, as Prime Minister, as I led these negotiations, I am going to the people who make the decisions. Whether it is an oil company, a government. During my term of office, I led these things and I went to where the decision is being made. That's when you can say you are impacting the decision, and the person who is making the decision can benefit from your input in the negotiations and the education that goes towards the decision. We had the energy minister missing from all these discussions. He went to Washington recently. We don't know who he spoke to. We don't know what was the issue. But just to say he went to Washington, and we have no idea who he spoke to and how the matter was advanced. The Prime Minister is in New York, interfering in all of these and getting all these great results, no Minister of Energy. But the Attorney General is now coming to tell you, because he is the Attorney General and a contract is involved, the matter now falls to him. I tell you, as a former Prime Minister, as a citizen who know the details of this very important matter, we are in big trouble and deep doo-doo if that is how we intend to proceed on this matter. Now, up to that point, I was just a listener to the press conference. But when the Attorney General said that what they have got, which is still not clear to any of us in this country, cost $500,000 to get this superior Ofac license step by step, where they now get the permission to talk to Venezuela and the permission to proceed to the next level and so on. He said, that superior position cost $500,000. But the previous government, meaning the government of which I was the Prime Minister, leader of that administration, the previous government spent over $100 million on this issue and had nothing to show for it. That was the statement of the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, who called the media to his presence to treat with a matter of grave importance to Trinidad and Tobago, and that is the government's position. So the previous government, in attempting to deal with this issue, which they have fixed like that, for $500,000, the previous government spent over $100 million and had nothing to show. I thought at that stage that I have a duty to enter this debate and set the record straight, and that's why you are here this morning. I have taken the opportunity to make some notes from my research and from my notes, having led this situation since 2016, to let you know that you need, and the public needs to follow me a little bit, to go back to understand what we are dealing with. I want to take you to an issue of gas curtailment in Trinidad and Tobago. Curtailment means rolling back in the consumption and availability of gas. I need not waste your time to tell you, because the whole country knows how important gas and petrochemicals and oil are to Trinidad and Tobago. This morning we wouldn't deal with the oil issue because that's been dealt with at length with the restructuring of Petrotrin. I want to deal with the gas issue. And I want to remind you and the country that this tool from which I sit here as one of two people, myself and Stuart Young, who are the only other prime ministers of Trinidad and Tobago. And the one who's in office now, we had to deal with this issue frontally as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I was, prior to being Prime Minister, the opposition leader with responsibility not only for the entire opposition, but for the energy portfolio in opposition. So I am familiar with the issue and its details. And I can tell you, in 2013, we asked the government what was happening, why Point Lisa's plants were having gas curtailment, meaning the plants could not get enough gas to produce at the full capacity. The then minister, in responding to this matter, told the country that don't worry, the problem is temporary. They are doing maintenance work, and as soon as the maintenance is over, we will get back to normal consumption and production levels. That was the position of the UNC minister, and that was 2013. However, those of us who were monitoring the industry knew that that was not true, because in 2013, NGC, which was the aggregator and supplier of the gas, contracted so to do. NGC was the one who was telling the companies, we don't have enough gas to give you all you need at this point in time. Sometimes on the morning of the instruction, plants were being told, turn out, shut down your plant now because we are without enough gas for you to continue. Give them that instruction in the morning to turn off your tap immediately. Now those plants are not designed to operate like that. When they get that kind of instruction or frequently have to turn off their operation because of curtailment of gas, it damages the equipment and it's also dangerous. And it affects the output and it also affects government's revenues. But that was happening in 2013. I need not tell you who the government was in 2013, and the government would have known that. Because that was so important to this country that any government worthy of the salt of that name would have known that. That was 2013. I was in the opposition and I knew that. 2013, it was averaging about a 10 to 15% reduction because they were reducing it across the board so that everybody could get not all that you need, but most of what we are available. That was averaging about 15%. And of course, if you know anything about that business, the profitability of those plants improve as you get nearer 100%. When you're up to 80%, 85%, 90%, 95%, the higher up you go, the better your profitability. If you go in the other direction, you could be producing, but getting close to losing money. That's the nature of that business. So that was 2013. In 2013, going into 2014, sometimes the curtailment could be as high as 25%, and there were instances where the curtailment was 30%. That was happening here. And while that was happening, the UNC government, through its minister, was not being level and truthful to the population. We were raising this in the opposition, but we were voice crying in the wilderness. The People's Partnership majority and the incompetent media was allowing this to pass, and the government got passed with that. Come 2014, in 2014, NGC invoked, in some instances, its force majeure clause in its contract. You know what that means? They were seeking to protect themselves from this inability to discharge their responsibility in their contract. Force majeure. You can research it to understand what that means. You can go to experts to understand what is the implication of force majeure in a contract when it is invoked. NGC did that because the curtailment was so serious, so regular, and so sustained. It was not maintenance. It was a significant signal that our capacity to produce and supply could not meet the contracts that NGC had entered into. And NGC was now facing liability claims for being unable to supply that contracted obligation. That's 2014. 2015, some of the users of gas in Point Lisas they were so desperate, started to begin to make their own search to look for their own gas because they were seeing that NGC was up to capacity and was not able to come through in any short term. So they might as well look for other gas if that's available. That was happening 2014. 2015, 2016, after the election was in September. By early 2016, one of the first things we had to deal with was the MHTL plant being shut down completely. One of the major plants in Point Lisas, because of the gas shortage, that plant was pulled out of the production system. Approximately 80 workers, highly skilled workers, lost their jobs. 2017 didn't improve. The M2 plant was pulled out of the line. Another 60 or 70 workers lost their jobs. And of course, the country lost the production. And we started talking to you about it. And as Prime Minister from 2016, I prioritized my day work on looking to see where improvement could come, what work we had to initiate to bring a halt to the decline in gas, and even possibly turn it around to increase our production. Our gas consumption at peak was 4.1 billion cubic feet per day. By the time we came into office, almost 1 billion less was being consumed because it wasn't available. And as you go on that slope, with the inflection of time, you are able to produce less and less. Today, as I speak to you, it's probably in the order of about 2.6 billion cubic feet, down from peak 4.1. So as Prime Minister, looking at the country's medium and long term, where is the gas going to come from to keep us in this business? We looked throughout our own environment in Trinidad and Tobago and came to the conclusion that there was no real prospect of any major input from us here, because we hadn't had a major gas find in this country for a long time. And we had, you know, within our border, it's one of the most heavily explored areas in the world. We know next door, Venezuela has gas and more gas and surplus gas, and therefore it made good sense to look to Venezuela for a supply of gas when our supply was, to put it mildly, was running out. We looked at two aspects of going to Venezuela. One, we share we share 3 fields with Venezuela on our southern border. In order of size, the biggest one was Loran Manatee, the smallest one was Dorado, and the second smallest one was Coquina Maniquin. The country, PNM and UNC governments, for 15 years were following the normal arrangement of trying to have unitization, meaning Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago had to have agreement and together come to a point to extract that gas where the border runs through the gas field. 15 years, we made no real progress because ideas were different in Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. And in Venezuela, the general policy in Venezuela is that they are not inclined, or they don't want to, and they will not be having their gas go abroad from Venezuela. They too want to get in the petrochemical business. That's what the position. And they were saying in those days, since they had 73% of Manatee and Loran, that field, you with 23%, you really can't tell us what to do. When we start doing something, your 23% will come into play. The government that I led thought that the time had come to reopen these discussions with Venezuela and put a different proposal on the table. Say to Venezuela, let us cancel unitization, and that is after I let them know the calamity that was facing us with respect to curtailment and gas running out. We put on the table, allow us to extract our 23%, because it's a small amount to you, but to us, it is major. And we got Venezuela to agree that we will cancel the unitization arrangement and those documents and reopen discussions on a new arrangement to allow Trinidad and Tobago to go in as the minority owner, to open the field and take its portion of the Loran Manatee field. That is going on right now, Shell as the operator, and that is the next body of gas that could come to Trinidad and Tobago from that arrangement. So when you hear misleaders telling you about all eggs in one basket, they are at the back of the hen because they don't know what's going on at the head. We had every hand in every possibility, even encouraging upstream producers to open small, hitherto uneconomic fields because we wanted every molecule of gas. And we also opened up the deep and the ultra-deep areas for tenders. Of course, we didn't get any bids for the ultra-deep for many, many occasions, and only in January of this year that we got some interest in the ultra-deep when we, the PNM, agreed to go along with Exxon to amalgamate the acreages out there which had attracted no interest and allow Exxon to go and see what they can do out there in the coming years. But of course, when we get down to the situation of the second prong with Venezuela, we looked at fields owned by Venezuela. Not just the ones that we share, but the ones that are entirely in Venezuela. The nearest one, proven gas field, is the Dragon field across the Bocas out there. And incidentally, what made that argument so attractive to us in the PNM cabinet is that we have a pipeline from Western Tobago down through the Bocas, down to Point Lisas, to Atlantic LNG in Point 14, and the platform that has that is owned by Trinidad and Tobago and Shell. And the nearest field, 17 kilometers away, is the smallest of those fields in Venezuela there. It's Dragon. And beyond Dragon, there are two larger prospects, one called Meliones, one called Patos, behind Dragon. And we saw that if we could get Venezuela to change its standard international policy on gas and come around to thinking that it could market its gas through Point Lisas, we will be doing something for Trinidad and Tobago and for Venezuela. And as Prime Minister, I led that charge. And I put Stuart Young as Minister of Energy and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister to lead our delegation with our technicians from the Ministry of Energy. And we then went ahead to bring forward this whole idea of Trinidad and Tobago supporting its economy and its people and its future with gas, some of our gas coming from Venezuela. And Venezuela has untested potential acreages to the east of us and to the south of us, because we are in eastern Venezuela. Venezuela energy industry is to the west of us. But they have the largest oil reserve in the world, and they have a huge gas reserve as well. While we are struggling here to produce 2.6 BCF for our Point Lisas lifeblood, Venezuela flares approximately 2 billion cubic feet of gas per day in Venezuela. Understand? So we have a conversation between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. And this had nothing to do with who was in Washington wanting to change the government in Venezuela. That was a different argument, but we had to operate within that environment. And it was our skillful diplomatic competence that caused us to be able, one, to get Venezuela to agree to the Manatee-Loran arrangement, and also to get Venezuela to agree to the Dragon arrangement. It surprises me today that many of the voices who are now cheering and praising and misleading you about Dragon and the importance of the prime ministers, this are the prime minister, that when we had that agreement from Venezuela, it was the same thing. It was because we knew that it was so important. And it was such a watershed event that I, as Prime Minister, took a chartered plane from Trinidad and took the entire available media to Caracas to see the signing of that agreement, because it was the breakthrough that we had hoped for. Unfortunately, when we came back to Trinidad, The most important stories that came out of that trip from our local media, one was some undescribable talking about there was no toilet paper in Miraflores Palace. That was one of the big stories in one of the newspapers. And the other one was I was in a conga line dancing with Maduro. Those are the two stories that dominated the media in Trinidad and Tobago in a situation where we had got Venezuela to agree. And what we had gone to do was to sign an agreement that was something that many people thought couldn't have happened. Let me tell you how far that agreement came from. Before we talked to Venezuela, and before we had any agreement signed, I, in my capacity as the country's #1 salesman, I went to London to meet the decision makers of Shell in London and to tell them what we think could happen in Trinidad and Tobago, what we were thinking in the government about trying to get gas from Venezuela. At that time, the gas market was down, and Shell looked at me and told me how much money they were losing per day. And therefore, my conversation to them was in a time when it didn't look as if that was something that we can take seriously. I kept on with the argument, and I kept on making the case. At the end of that meeting, the head of Shell said to me, okay, you go ahead. Because I had to tell them, as I'm telling you about this dragon field, understand, Trinidad and Tobago does not have the money to do it. Because by that time, the UNC had cleaned out the 17 billion at NGC. So any development program like gas field development and pipeline, we couldn't fund without going to the Treasury. And you know what the Treasury was like then, and still is. So I said to Shell, this is good business where all of us can benefit. But understand that Trinidad and Tobago cannot fund this arrangement. And it was then that Shell said to me, leading my delegation, if you could get Venezuela to agree for you to use that gas field, Shell will find the funding as your partner. And that is how Shell is the operator and funding the arrangements on the Dragon Field, where the last thing we did out there was happening out there. I don't know where it is now, because the last time when I was in office, we had 2 ships on the field, mapping out the pipeline route, looking at the well spotting arrangements for wells to be drilled and for gas to come to Trinidad and Tobago, Washington not interfering to put an end to it. Because at that time we had the Ofac license and we had a government in Washington. Unfortunately, the government changed, as governments do. As you see a government change in Trinidad and Tobago. In Washington, you have a different story going on. Trinidad and Tobago, you have the same story going on. Government change, elections have consequences. All of us could say that. American citizens, Trinidad and Tobago citizens. But at the time when we were going along with this, that was the situation. The government and people of Trinidad and Tobago had access to that gas field. Shell was funding it. And we had arrangements in place where the contract of lease of the gas field was between the sovereign state of Venezuela and the sovereign state of Trinidad and Tobago. We ensured that there was no middleman arrangement. We brushed aside attempts to have middleman arrangement, and we insisted to the president of Venezuela that the arrangement must be between the government of Venezuela and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. There were instances when I had to send Stuart Young to Venezuela as a messenger with a post, with a letter to the president of Venezuela to ensure that this negotiation was not derailed or that decisions were not taken which were inimical to the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It took time, it took patience, and it took diplomatic skill. I just want to tell you, as a result of the curtailment, with a shortage of gas in Point Lisas, that ensured that there was no further new investment in Point Lisas. You all observe that, right? Who will go and invest in another plant or to expand the plant or anything like that if you are having that curtailment issue? And worse, because NGC since 2013 was in this situation of not being able to supply its full contractual arrangement to the various plants, and our claims were building up. By the time we came in as government, there was almost $2 billion in claims. I think it was about $2 billion in claims that NGC was facing. So it wasn't only the money in their savings that were removed in the current account of the government. They had a $2 billion claim, and that claim was growing for gas that they couldn't supply to the contracts in Point Lisas. One of the things that we did in treating with this situation, again led by Minister Stuart Young, a very eminent lawyer who was in the cabinet at the time, he led the negotiations, and we were able to negotiate away $2 billion in claims against the NGC. Understand? So when you hear people saying that the government can do nothing as this, no, I see fashionable with these people in office. You were there for 10 years and you did nothing. One of the nothings that we did was to negotiate away from NGC $2 billion in certified claims. And while I'm on that subject of negotiating away liabilities, in the courthouse, where there were claims from one state enterprise by contractors, we negotiated away $1.2 billion in certified claims that were fraudulently put on a state enterprise. You would have seen this appeal court upholding the decision a couple of weeks ago that conspiracy arrangements and criminal conduct resulted in NGC, in this EMBD company, facing those claims. And we had to go to the court to fight it, and we won in the court, and the taxpayer escaped the payment of $1.2 billion. So those two issues alone, $2.2 billion, $3.2 billion that we saved this country, just by those two instances. But we didn't go around crowing and looking for kudos and pat on the back. It was our job. And that job was led by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Energy and State Enterprises, as it may be. That was our job. So let me give you a little rough idea. When Mr. Jeremy, who I've already described, I have to apologize for the description I made of him, because I do have an affection for dogs, right? So I am not going to deal with him at this time. That's for later. But having said that, we spent over $100 million and got nothing to show for it. I want to take you down Trinidad and Tobago's pursuit of the Dragon license. 2016, I'm just being advised that the claims at NGC was $8 billion, not $2 billion. $8 billion that we negotiated away. So figure that out. 2016, Trinidad and Tobago and Shell discussed the potential of Dragon gas field, and Prime Minister agreed to lead the charge to Venezuela to open those discussions. So if you hear anybody telling you, as they're trying to tell you now, that when they were in government before, this is something that was happening and it took how many years, this started in 2016. Before 2016, there was no initiative in this country to access sovereign Venezuelan gas fields. There was unitization initiative for the shared fields on the border. But to say a Venezuelan gas field, that started in 2016. 2017 to 2018, technical and commercial negotiations continued among PDVSA, which is the Venezuelan equivalent oil company, that's the national oil company, PDVSA, is simply called PDVSA, and our NGC, 2017-2018. And it wasn't done in a Vicky way. overseen by the Prime Minister at Whitehall, and leading the team was the Minister of Energy, Minister Young, and a team from the NGC and the Ministry of Energy. That was the three-legged stool. Stuart Young, Minister, leading national team for Trinidad and Tobago. Shell had their team, and Venezuela had their team. And together, they sat around tables and worked out this idea, bringing it towards a point where a contract and a lease could be executed. 2019, remember we started 2016 working on this thing. 2019, US sanctions on Venezuela's energy sector shut down pursuit of jargon. But by that time, we had made significant progress. We were moving inexorably towards producing from a proven field. But external forces added to our burden. We now have to go to the United States to negotiate with them from a zero position to one where we have to say to them, there's a case here for what we call a carve-out. You've put this blanket sanction against the world, but the case is to be made for Trinidad and Tobago to conduct its business with Venezuela and not be stymied by what you are doing in your foreign policy with Venezuela. That charge was led by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who sought help. I'll tell you who the help was. By March 2020, at the end of 2019, Minister Young made several trips to Caracas. You would have seen the opposition making an issue about the number of trips, as if that is the important thing. It is because it was tenuous, it was sensitive, but it was very important. And it was important for the discussions to be kept going along, not to be left lying so that good ideas could, you could wait and then the officers change and you start from scratch again and get nowhere. That's why the unitization took 15 years and didn't get anywhere. We made sure that we kept as part of the team. Minister Young was doing that. But the Vice President of Venezuela saw it fit, because these discussions have to be face-to-face discussions in many instances. The Vice President came to Trinidad and Tobago during COVID, and of course, what was the outcome of that? The outcome of the Vice President coming here, discussing two things, jargon and access to vaccines, caused the UNC government to call on the United States not to help us with what we are fighting for, but to use their heavy-handed sanction and sanction Rowley as Prime Minister and Stuart Young as Minister. That was the UNC's position. And when you are sanctioned, the first thing they do is deny you a visa. And if we were sanctioned, it means that all the meetings we had in Washington, in Houston, and in New York couldn't have been had. And we couldn't have advanced this thing, because being sanctioned, we couldn't have gone to the United States and no American official could have dealt with us. That was the action of the United States. I see today, Finance Minister Tanku is using the word unpatriotic to describe PNM Senator Vishnu Danpal, an expert in finance and public accounting, who pointed out that this government is leading us inexorably to the IMF. He is saying that that statement by Minister Danpal is unpatriotic. Well, Prime Minister, Finance Minister Tanku, what is unpatriotic? Is the UNC calling on the United States, begging them, pleading with them to deny a visa to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Energy so that we could not go to Washington to negotiate these things. That is more than unpatriotic. That is, well, what's beyond that? If I say treason, if I say that, I'm not saying that because I don't think I want to say that they knew what they were doing. Because right now, my view is this government does not know what it is doing. Because no citizen of this country could know what you're doing and would be taking the positions that you are taking. I know you want to get credit. I know you want to be seen to be doing something. But if you understood the importance of these issues and how to deal with them, no patriotic citizen would have been doing the things that you're doing here. And of course, by 2022, lawyers were brought in to negotiate and finalize the contractual arrangements of the Ofac license. We had to have our lawyers involved to make the case and to walk through the American system all the way through the White House. I've been to the White House. Stuart Young has been there. I've been to the departments in Washington with the lawyers guiding. We got the best lawyers, and the best lawyers aren't cheap. But you want to make sure that we have some element of success, and in the end we were successful. When Chevron got a month-to-month license, we got a 2-year license. We were the only country that had a 2-year license, Ofac license. We met with Democrats, we met with Republicans, we recruited into our argument and our issues and our interests. The speaker, the chairman of committees. You would have seen Maxine Waters coming to Barbados to meet me in Barbados. You would have seen Benny Thompson. You would have seen a number of people. When we had the CARICOM 50th anniversary celebration here, you saw the powerful US delegation, bipartisan delegation that came here. It was because we had made those arrangements and those contacts in the US government across the floor. That's what it was. And of course, by the time we got to 2022, we had a gas project, and the United States president, not the president, supported that. By April of 2022, Minister Young was in Washington. And one of the people he met with in Washington in that go-round was a fellow called Senator Dodd, Chris Dodd, right? He was the personal emissary of President Biden, appointed in preparation of the Summit of the Americas conference. And he was sent to Trinidad and Tobago to meet me. And I remained in contact with him throughout. As we got to Los Angeles and elsewhere, and the issue of this Ofac license was foremost in my discussion with emissary Chris Dodd. And in the end, Minister Young took over, and we got to the point where the Ofac license was eventually issued. By 2022, I could have said to you, if today I have to thank people for assisting Trinidad and Tobago with getting the Ofac license, I must thank the Prime Minister of Barbados, the President, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, former President of Suriname, President Santoki, President Irfan Ali of Guyana, and President Abinada of the Dominican Republic. These 4 heads of government and 5 heads of state worked alongside me, walked with me all the way to the Vice President's office and the President's office in Washington. And they came there in support of the argument being presented by Trinidad and Tobago that notwithstanding what US policy against Venezuela is, there's a bigger picture here, and that picture is the economic well-being of Trinidad and Tobago. Because I had to make the case to the United States that if we are denied a sustaining flow of gas, it would have far-reaching deleterious consequences for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, whose economy and standard of living would be drastically lowered. And that is not in the U.S.'s interest. That was the argument we are carrying. We have 275,000 people in the United States. Many of them support families in Trinidad and Tobago. So if there's that difficulty in the United States, it reflects itself in Trinidad and Tobago. And if our economy contracts in Trinidad and Tobago, it will reflect itself in everything that the United States is fighting against, which is modern immigration and security issues on their border. Those are the arguments we carried. And in the end, with the support of those heads of government and heads of state, we were able to convince the US authorities. That is how Trinidad and Tobago got to where we were when the UNC came into office and met an Ofac license, met Shell on the ground, met a 30-year lease for the Dragon Field. And of course, the political situation had it stymied. The political situation had it now where it is a temporary, how should I put it? It's more like an onion where as you peel off the skin, you have to go deeper and deeper. But if you ask yourself, what exactly is a Dragon Field? Why is it so important to Trinidad and Tobago? It's a field that has approximately 4.1 to 4.2 trillion cubic feet of gas. That's about a third of the existing proven reserves of Trinidad and Tobago. When we get access to that field, if we got access to it today, we would have improved our reserves by a third. That is huge in the scheme of things, where we are moving down from 4.1 production consumption to 3.8 to 3.6 to 2.9 to 2.6 to 2.3. If in that scenario you could improve your proven reserves, and I'm not here talking about Exxon going to start to do seismic out in the ultra deep, or Grenada hoping to find a producing well. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a proven field, proven and tested field, which adjoins a larger proven field. What are the prospects of that? And what is the value of a field of that nature? Approximately 4 billion cubic feet, depending on the quality of the gas and the price in the marketplace. At the very lowest market arrangement that we are familiar with, that field's gross value is approximately valued at over 10 billion US dollars. If on the other hand you look at, and that is dealing with a market where gas is about 2.5 per MMCF, right? If the market goes up to like say $4, that field is now would be gross value of over 16 billion US dollars. And if you're operating in the market of $6 gas, which is where some of our arrangements are in the restructuring of the LNG business, if you operate in there, you could talk about a field that is worth 24 to 25 billion US dollars. That's what Dragon is. But of course, I'm not talking about profits here. I'm talking about the value of the field. Because by the time you take out the subtract the costs of operation, the taxes and royalties, which will go to owners and whoever else, and of course, the profits come at the end, right? But the value of the field to all participants, that's what you're talking about. And of course, when John Jeremy said that we spent over $100 million on the Dragon Field and had nothing to show. Now, when Exxon got that license the other day to proceed, you all in the media, did this government tell you that they got some money from Exxon? A bonus, a signing bonus? Did they tell you that? Because that is standard in the industry. When you give up an area to be explored, the person who wins the bid, it is standard that they pay a bonus to the owner, the government, right away. We get that all the time from all the people who get contracts to go and explore. So if you go into Venezuela and you get a gas field of the kind I just described, why are you surprised that you have to pay a sign-in bonus there? And NGC has a share of the responsibility as it would have a share of the product. And there's a split in how the gas is to be used when it comes to Trinidad. It's a 30-70, where 70% go to LNG and 30% go to domestic. In that domestic is used by IT and tech. What is the implication of that for electricity rates in Trinidad and Tobago? What is the implication of that for the petrochemical industry? So all of these are interests. So when John Jeremy said the prior arrangement covered the whole thing and they somehow did a superior thing by getting some step-by-step arrangement for 6 months to meet benchmarks, you should know now what you're dealing with. Because he correctly said the original arrangement covered the whole gamut, right? Under a 2-year Ofac license. And I tell you something else too. One of the reasons why we were able to convince some Republicans in the parliament in America to go along and support us with this is because we had spare capacity to produce ammonia and fertilizers. Those states have huge agricultural demand. And when we told them where we stood in the supply of agricultural product, fertilizers, they realized there was a benefit to be had. And they came on board in supporting the carve-out. Antigua was with us on this issue, spoke eloquently and forcefully about this carve-out for Trinidad and Tobago, because Antigua knows that if Trinidad and Tobago is healthy, Antigua is healthy. And if Trinidad and Tobago is not healthy, Antigua will ail. And CARICOM was right there with us. You should have heard the presentation made by the Prime Minister of Barbados and the President of Suriname on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago. I could tell you, one of my closest colleagues in CARICOM who stood with me shoulder to shoulder, a very convincing speaker and a Caribbean patriot, President Ofac of Guyana. He never missed an opportunity. When he spoke at the Summit of the Americas, I don't think his statement about Guyana was more powerful than the statement he made about Trinidad and Tobago on this very issue in Los Angeles. But in Trinidad and Tobago, that passes, with the daily news. But when it comes to a situation where the government is trying to fool you and is lying to you and trying to revise history, all of a sudden everybody's interested. I see the Chamber of Commerce praising the government for getting an Ofac license. What are you praising them for? What do they have? You know what they got? The Attorney General refused to tell us what the contract is. Are you going to begin to negotiate tabula rasa, clean tabletop? Is that what Mr. Rubio asked you to do? Can you pay Venezuela for its gas? Because we already know when the Americans say, you could take the gas, but you mustn't pay for it, Venezuela said in Spanish some unprintable words. And we had to go back to Washington and negotiate again with the Americans and say, listen, we will have to find a way. We can't tell you what your foreign policy should be, but it's having this effect on the outcome. And we renegotiated with the Americans to the point where eventually they agreed that we could pay the people for their assets. What is the position today? We do not know. And whatever it is, it only lasts for 6 months. And that cannot be an improvement on what was there for 2 years and, of course, covered the whole gamut of interests between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. And finally, I want to say this. If today there's an Ofac license, provisional or otherwise, regardless of the terms and conditions, if today it turns out that the most important thing to happen now is the negotiation between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, because we now know the parameters of what the US will tolerate. Right? Unfortunately, it is in an environment and a climate where military presence and regime change is closer to us than ever. But if today, what is required is Trinidad and Tobago talking to Venezuela to bring Venezuela around to get us back to where we were on the day when the last Ofac license was cancelled. If we can't get that done today, it is largely going to be because of the misbehavior and the misstep and the misspeaking and the carelessness and the don't care damn of the government of Trinidad and Tobago dating back to 2016. That's where we're at. Because now that you got an Ofac license, I heard the press asking the Attorney General, who assumed the role of spokesman for the government on this matter, have you spoken to Venezuela? Are you speaking to Venezuela? Do you intend to talk to Venezuela? And he couldn't answer, and he wouldn't answer, and he was coy and playing smart with foolishness about what I can't tell you about. That is the kernel of the matter. That's the nub of the matter. That is the heart of the matter. Getting Venezuela to now agree, but you think it's more important to say that the Americans want this and the Americans want that, but it's Venezuelan gas. So it's more important what Venezuela wants. Because there's no plant in Point Lisa's processing Ofac paper. And of course, as we talk about talking to Venezuela, the whole question of who is going to be doing this talking to Venezuela. If you talk to Minister Young or any of the technocrats who were in the various meetings, they will tell you how in the negotiations and the discussions, we went out of our way every time it seems to be going off track to insist that the arrangements on this matter must remain between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela as sovereign states. So here we have a situation where the government wouldn't tell you, or probably can't tell you, which of them going to Venezuela to negotiate this matter. But they're quite happy to tell you that Shell is there doing it. Let me just say something to you. We respect our partners among the multinationals in energy. We built up great relations with them. And many of them have met us halfway along the way when we were stumbling. But make no mistake about it. Multinationals, their first obligation is to their shareholders. And when you see a government, right, relinquishing its role and responsibility as the sovereign government in a situation as sensitive as this, and telling you that Shell is down in Venezuela talking to the Venezuelans, they might be happy with that. I am nervous about that. Because it is quite open to Shell to negotiate for Shell alone. We ensured that Trinidad and Tobago negotiated for all partners. And of course, it doesn't have to be Shell. You would have heard Minister AG yesterday say that how they got this Ofac license is because there are interests to be had by American companies. You remember that? You all understand what that means? That means it doesn't have to be Shell. It could be anybody else. And if it's anybody else, as determined by Venezuela, who will protect Trinidad and Tobago's interest to ensure that we are at the table, we are in the pipeline, and we are at the end of the LNG plant where the money is made? Where will our income come from if others negotiate on their behalf and there's nobody there protecting our interests? I want to end on this note. This is serious business. This is the future of the children of Trinidad and Tobago. And this clown show that the UNC is carrying on here with is a threat to the children of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much. If you have a question, I'll take a couple questions.
Dr. Rowley, allow me to just pick up on the point that...
But I'm not changing the subject, eh?
Understood.
Good, right.
After articulating what you articulated regarding the relations, you mentioned misbehavior, misspeaking, etc. Do you think that the damage is already done when it comes to our ability to negotiate with Venezuela?
I would say that in international relations, countries sometimes are very far apart. But when they examine their interests, they eat humble pie and be well fed in ensuring that their interests take priority over their egos. Countries have to do that from time to time. If you misstep, you have a duty to walk it back. And you now have to rely on your counterpart accepting you as a new convert. But to come and try to pretend that your arrangement that you settle with somebody else is a new improvement is just to be gaslighting a whole nation, everybody with their eyes wide open. Because I'm sure you all are intelligent people, you all are in the media, the population is an intelligent population. You would see where we are at now as against where we were or where we could have been. And what is required now is for the government of Trinidad and Tobago to do no harm, no further harm.
So, a point of clarification. Is Dragon a 4 trillion cubic feet of gas or 4 billion? I think I heard you.
Trillion.
All right, trillion cubic.
Trillion, 4 TCF. Trillion. Billion is what you consume. At the plants, 4.1 billion cubic feet. That's what we burn at our peak in the 2008 period. That's what we're using. We don't know, every day we're consuming upwards of 2 billion cubic feet, right? Billion cubic feet. When you talk about the price, you talk about millions cubic feet. So it's millions, billions, trillions. The field, right, is 1 trillion cubic feet, right? Or half a trillion, 0.5 TCF. Dragon is 4. Millionaires is about 10 or 12 or 15. That size behind Dragon out there. And that's what it is.
No, I heard trillion and I heard a billion at one point.
I may have misspoken once because sometimes when you're talking about trillion and billion, it might sound like million, sound like billion and vice versa. But it is billion for the field and trillion for the field, 4 trillion, and in consumption is how many billions per day of cubic feet.
Thanks for the clarification. I just want to ask, you mentioned the issue of the present U.S. situation in terms of the military presence. The U.S. says that it's engaging in a war against drug cartels. The government presently has given its full support for recent U.S. military strikes on boats the U.S. says were being used by narco-terrorists in Venezuela, but the government also is saying they have nothing against the people of Venezuela. Is that a sort of precarious political position to be in dealing with this dragon gas issue?
As a former prime minister who lived this situation before, especially one that led the CARICOM position on this issue, I would reserve my comments on that because I don't want to further inflame or embarrass anybody. I simply want to say that this little nation must be aware that nobody owes us lunch and everybody we deal with have their interests to protect. And our skills and our success would be determined by whether we protected our interests. That covers everything you've raised there in specificity, but I don't want to get into any specificity simply because of the position I hold as a former prime minister of this country. My comment, right, is not to be anything but helpful. Unfortunately, like today, having stayed out of this discussion before, the behavior of the Attorney General and the government's broadcast foolishness caused me to come out to correct the record. Because I see people in this country being led behind the Pied Piper of nonsense. This is a serious matter where the facts and the facts alone should guide us. Policies, diplomacy, diplomatic moves are matters for the governments. If our government finds itself in a situation where it cannot do what is required, whether it's in Berlin or in Australia or in Caracas, then you know you have a problem with the government. Right? Because I could tell you one thing, at the height, when Maduro was given 8 days to leave office, and our friend up north, Canada, had indicated that the time for talk was done, and regime change was openly spoken of as the objective, and Trinidad and Tobago was enticed into taking a side. I was part of the CARICOM spearhead, along with Mayor Motley of Barbados and Prime Minister Harris of St. Kitts. The three of us went to the United Nations and treated with that issue by bringing the United Nations involved to calm the issue by determining just who should we deal with in Caracas. And we didn't stop there. You would have seen our parliamentarians here talking about trip and take away Rowley passport because he's traveling too much. We had to bring Uruguay in. We had to bring Mexico in. We brought Norway in. We brought South Africa in because the way these things go, you need support. A tiny nation like this, a small area like the CARICOM, when you get on the international stage with these major weighty matters, you can't allow it to be brushed off. Our position was we might be small, but we are not insignificant. Let me give you an example of what's going on. We were on the verge, in fact, we had already opened the situation for Trinidad and Tobago to lobby for a place on the Security Council in the next go around. I wanted to ask the government if they're still pursuing that and how it's going and see how it turns out, right? Trinidad and Tobago. We just came down from being the president of the UNGA last year. And against that background, we launched a campaign to get on the Security Council. St. Vincent has come off. We aim to go on there sometime soon with a campaign. If our government is prepared to put our profile up there for examination by the world. Right?
Do you think that the conditional license also that has been given to us is inferior to the one that it has replaced or the one that we had before, and that it puts Trinidad and Tobago on a very short leash in terms of its relationship with
I don't know. The Attorney General was very careful not to tell you what they always call for, which is transparency. We told the country what the 2-year Ofac license contained. We told the country why we had to go and renegotiate when the Americans said you can't pay for the gas with cash. We told the country when we got that settled. Right? I cannot say after that goon show yesterday that I know what the terms of the Ofac license is. I know the AG was very cagey in not telling us what the details are. And I know it's, if I'm to believe him, that is for 6 months. There's no way a 6-month license could be an improvement on a 2-year license. That is just my thinking. There's no way a license that was broad, covering all the bases, could be inferior to one that you are now put on a leash and you walk in step and you get permission to go through to the next step if you meet certain benchmarks. I don't know what the benchmarks are. So I don't know enough about the details of that to comment further.
And are you categorically denying the Attorney General's statement that your government spent over $120 million pursuing this matter?
Let me tell you what the expenses are. NGC, right, as a partner in the matter, would have had to make a payment, right, as is required. NGC would have made approximately a $1 million payment, right? And you can get the details. I expect that my colleagues in the parliament will ask the appropriate questions, and I hope that the speaker allows the answer to be given where the specifics of these matters could be had. But off the top of my head, from what I knew from where I sat, monitoring the whole situation, we got NGC into this, representing us as a partner in the business. We know payments had to be made. From my notes and my recollection, the NGC would have made a payment of approximately $1 million. And they would have made that payment after the contract was had, when we did the sign off through Minister Young's team. NGC would have made that payment about approximately 6 to 9 months after. Something about there. And of course, there would have been a payment of a sign-on, the bonus payment that I mentioned earlier on. Again, from where I start, that payment may be in the order of about $4 or $5 million. I don't know the exact figure, but Minister Young might be able to help you with that. And of course, the government who now has the files. But don't take what the AG said, because he's off on a frolic of his own. And the other payment, a small amount of money would have been spent looking at the integrity of the Hibiscus platform, because that platform would have been the receiving hub, and small amount of money, probably a few tens of thousands of US dollars or 100,000. And of course, you would have had lawyers, legal fees. And again, the legal fees would have been in the order of, approximately, 2 million US, 3 million US, that sort of thing. But if you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar business, and you want the best specialist lawyers in the world, 2, 3, 4, 5 million US dollars to get those lawyers. Anybody making an issue of that, I wonder how they're running the household. They're just looking for issues. There's no way that we would have spent $100 million on this issue, as Mr. Jeremy would have said. And if you compare apples with apples, where he said they spent $500,000, I don't know on what. But since he said that, you may want to ask him, what did you spend it on? Is it airfare? Is it taking people to lunch? Is it lawyers? But $500,000 he said they spent. And the equivalent of what they did, we paid over $100 million for. That is not true. And for an attorney general to be attempting to so mislead the population, that's a frightening thing. Replacing the energy minister is not there. He is there as the font of the information. And he is taking that position to haltingly mumble and lie to the population. This is a serious matter. But don't let that distract you. Ask the appropriate questions, and the answers will be had to the penny. But the most important question to be asked now, to be answered now, is Trinidad and Tobago in a position to successfully negotiate the next step with Venezuela? And what are these steps that the United States have placed on Trinidad and Tobago in getting to its objective, which is getting gas from Venezuela?
In your view, Dr. Rowley, with the finalization of the Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago side of the Dragon deal, this phase of it, this new incarnation, will that require a face-to-face meeting between Prime Minister Prasad Bosesa and President Maduro?
I don't want to comment on that because I don't want to lay any yardstick down for the government's diplomacy. It is for the government to decide how to proceed. The objective is to advance the interests of Trinidad and Tobago. And if you could do it by not going there, more power to you. If you could do it by not naming and managing your cabinet, to talk to their counterparts where it matters. Because I see ministers glibly talking about being in touch with Venezuela, and we are constantly in touch, and then he tells you, I'm talking to the ambassador from Venezuela. That is not what is required. That is not what is required, if I may say so myself. The sovereign state of Venezuela requires to be treated with respect. And the fact that somebody else doesn't respect them don't mean that you, in advancing your business, should be disrespecting them too. You should put Trinidad and Tobago's interest first as you maintain the Errol Barrow principle that he laid down for us here in CARICOM. You can't think because you win a few seats in our election in Trinidad and Tobago and you are the government for 60 months, you could toss out through the window that principle that we are respectful of all, friends of all, but satellite of none. If that is what you are doing or that's what you have done, you are risking the future of Trinidad and Tobago, even in the corridors of our friends.
Dr. Rowley, I don't mean to perhaps invite you to enter conjecture, and I'm not doing that. But if you had to perhaps envisage how the American interests will benefit from this Ofac license, what would you say to that?
I don't want to comment on that because I don't know enough about it. I have not seen what the Ofac license has. I saw the Attorney General attempting to make it look as if something wonderful has happened because there are these strictures which only he knows about because he got the document. He said he got it from the night before. He's speaking about it as of what I am seeing. He is the only person who publicly said he's seen the document. I don't want to talk about something I don't know about. What I spoke to you about here today, I have intimate knowledge of because I led this charge. My notes are here. This is what I told you today, right? So let us hope that the government tells us what they've led us into, what we've received, or what we can do to advance our own interests.
And just while we're on that point, Jules, just one moment, right? Could you clarify whether or not NDAs were signed during your administration signing of the Ofac?
That's an interesting thing. Yesterday, the Attorney General, in his mumble first, told us, you know that in commercial matters, certain things are confidential and subject to non-disclosure, right? And he told you yesterday, you know that, right? If you know that, why when the PNM was negotiating the term sheet with Venezuela for the price to be paid for the gas and such confidential things, and they were subjected to confidentiality clauses of commerce, why then were you and the UNC behaving as though the government was hiding something to the point where you have people in the media now talking about the previous government acted in secrecy? All that does is demonstrate how ignorant you are of the situation that you are trying to comment on. Only last week, I saw one of a media person of some standing in this country saying to the cabal that is there now, well, now that you are being transparent, are we to expect more information than we got from the previous government who acted in secrecy? At every step of the way, the PNM government kept the nation informed of what we are doing with Caracas and their resource. To the point where I'm the only prime minister who took a plane load of reporters to Caracas on this matter. I'm the only prime minister who frequently would stand in front of the media, sometimes for 2 hours, feeling every question you ask me until you get to Mickey Mouse questions. I have stood in front of the media and I have never shied away from answering a question on this matter, nor did Minister Young. Look at today. Who knew what Ofac license was? Many of them in the government don't even know what Ofac means. But Ofac is a household word in the country right now. Household word. because we kept the country informed as to what we were doing. We told you where we had hurdles. We told you when we climbed over those hurdles. We told you when we couldn't make the height. Eh? They lied to you, telling you that the curtailment in Point Lisas was temporary and it was maintenance. We told you it was a decline, a natural decline of the fields. And if we don't get up and get in the not too distant future, we have to be out of the business of gas production for LNG or petrochemicals because we don't have the raw material. And that's why I, in my term, took so much time and effort to get more raw materials, gas. And they were lying about it, that, oh, the PNM has all its eggs in one basket in Dragon. We were all around, everywhere we could get gas. When they said, oh, I'm going to Grenada and Suriname and Guyana to get gas, what they knew or should know, or they pretended they didn't know, we had already, as a country, signed memoranda of agreements with Barbados, Grenada, Suriname, and Guyana. I, as Prime Minister, I have gone and spoken at the Guyana Energy Conference. Minister Young was a permanent feature at that conference. Minister Young went to Suriname to speak about the Memorandum of Understanding. And with respect to Barbados, I signed that in Barbados. But I'll tell you one thing. All that I'm saying here to you would have been put on the website of the Office of the Prime Minister. So any of you, anybody, could have gone there and you would have seen me and Prime Minister Motley in Barbados signing that Memorandum of Understanding and talking about our cooperation in energy. You would have seen what happened in Suriname with Minister Young. You would have seen what happened with me as feature speaker in Guyana at the Guyana conference. Go there now and tell me if you could find any of that on the website of the Office of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Are you aware that the Prime Minister, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, coming into office in May of 2025, has wiped that website off the face of the earth? And you know why? Because they don't want you to be able to access the facts of the past. Because they want to pretend that we started to live when they came into office. And that's why they have to be lying and taking credit for things they didn't do. Because the record is there of all that happened on them. Every time I had a public engagement, it would have been posted on the website there. Go there and see if you can find it now. When you go there now, there are about 3 or 4 things on that website, starting with the new government. Like the country started when they came into office. And the 3 things on the website are not Prime Minister working and meeting people and taking the country forward. There are some contracts that the law require that OPM publicize. There is no access to the record of the country at OPM because this government has removed that. So they could come and tell you stupidness now about they, and all of a sudden they're in love with Dragon and they're having a wedding with Dragon next month and Dragon is the love of their life. Absolute nonsense. What they have to do right now, if Dragon is going to play any role in this country's future, is humble themselves and find a way back to talk to the government of Venezuela and hope to get a balance between Washington and Caracas and Trinidad and Tobago benefiting from that. That's what they have to do. And if they can't do that, they would have undermined the future of this country and our children's future.
I'm just wondering, Dr. Rowley, if you don't mind, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, sorry about that.
No, you can interrupt me, no problem. I'm home, you know. Bring me some water there, please.
The statement from the State Department after the meeting between Prime Minister Prasad Besessa and Secretary Rubio, there was a line along the lines of the U.S. supporting the Dragon gas project, but something along the lines of as long as it doesn't benefit the Maduro regime. What is your take on that line?
Well, that is not new to me because some of the people, there was one particular person who was very powerful in Washington, of Latin extract, who had that position when we were negotiating. And with all that I've said to you early on, we couldn't turn him around. He was adamant. He is now no longer in the Senate because he has been interdicted. He has been indicted. That's a separate story. But he was a powerful person, and he wasn't an ally. And that is not new as the American position, but it's against that position that you have to negotiate and hope to be successful. That's the American position. That was their position when we started out, before we got an Ofac license.
Do you think that the strategy employed by the government in cooperation with the United States, the success of that strategy is contingent on regime change in Venezuela?
Well, again, I get from where I sit as a former prime minister and the conversation being raised at, I don't want to be Monday morning quarterback on this. I want to leave it a little open for those who have to deal, thank you, for those who have to deal with the issue, because it's not an easy issue. There's a lot I could say now that could inflame the situation, but I would not do that. But I am aware that there are challenges ahead. And I'm saying to you, to be fair to the government today, those were the same challenges that we faced when we started out. And we didn't walk away from it. We didn't try to revise history and lie about it. We sought to negotiate, win friends and influence people, use our competence in negotiations to bring about a positive outcome for Trinidad and Tobago. That regime change in Washington now is not new. As a matter of fact, I think they were further along. The only difference here now is that the military equipment is on the border right now. But I don't know if you recall, there was a particular day when John Bolton, who was National Security Advisor to President Trump, right? He went to a press conference and his notepad was visible to the media. And on that notepad, they were talking about 5,000 Colombian troops. You remember that day? That expose caused a big flare-up because the question was, is Colombia part of the regime change by force? And when the EU, with all those European countries, speaking as the EU, gave Maduro 8 days to leave office, that was an ultimatum. I'm not aware that there is such an 8-day ultimatum right now, but what I am aware is that the equipment to enforce that is available.
Right.
So I wouldn't go further in discussing it at this time.
So you're saying this government, given the challenges and so on, that this government operated like a bull in a china shop?
To say that would mean calling the government a bull. I don't think that they earn that status yet. I would say to you that the government is incompetent, the government is spiteful, and those are not attributes that comfort me. You may recall when we started to do the negotiations, which flowed from that spotlight on energy at the Hyatt. Remember the spotlight on energy? My government called the whole fraternity to the Hyatt, government and private sector, and we discussed our situation. And that is where I declared I am going to lead a charge to the multilaterals to get a better deal for Trinidad and Tobago. And there were those who were saying that I am going to cause contracts to be cancelled and investment to be stopped, and that kind of nonsense. When we did that, it was then that the former prime minister, who is now the present prime minister, asked publicly, what is the government shareholding in Atlantic LNG? She ran the country for 5 years and did not inform herself about an important matter like that. And therefore, No part of her and her government could have conceived or conceptualized a restructuring where our shareholding would move from train 1 alone to train 4, having none in trains 2 and trains 3, so that when train 1 was being closed because of the same gas curtailment, they started to try to score political points on that, not realizing that the country was on very thin ice in losing its revenue now and in the future in the LNG business. The former Prime Minister did not know what our shareholding was. Of course, the PNM answered that, and we went on to restructure the LNG business, and today we have a shareholding in trains 2, trains 3, and trains 4, and together we operate the LNG business as a part owner of one business. That's where we get our money from. You look at the last report signed by a chairman that she put in place, but the report is for 2024. You will see the chairman signing that it is the restructuring of the LNG business that has brought Atlantic LNG to the profitability that they declared for 2024. We're dealing with two different approaches and two different outcomes. Right? And I think I've said enough. You all, as a media, you have a duty to not be an enabler of foolishness in this country. You need to get the appropriate information to do justice to the public so that the public will not be fed a crock of nonsense as was fed yesterday by the Attorney General on a matter of life and death to us here in Trinidad and Tobago. A government in office for 60 months, having won an election, that is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of the story. And they started on a sour note. And since then, they have failed to win the hearts of the audience. Thank you very much. What is that?
Those wireless mics is a new technology.